Hey, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping into a huge topic, the epic 200-year battle of economic ideas that has shaped pretty much everything around us. And hey, if you've got a test coming up on economic liberalism, you are definitely in the right place. You know, when you really boil it all down, it comes back to this one single question. And for the last 2 centuries, this has been at the very heart of a massive ideological war. On one side, you have the champions of individual freedom and free markets, and on the other, those who argue for collective action and government intervention. And trust me, this isn't some abstract historical debate. We're talking about everything from the taxes you pay to the rules businesses have to follow, all the way to social safety nets. It all comes from this fundamental disagreement. So let's dive into the story of how our modern economic world really came to be. All right, Section 1, The Invisible Hand arrives. Our story kicks off back in the 18th century with an idea so radical, it basically turned the world upside down, sparking a revolution first in thought and eventually in industry itself. So, before this big shift, most economies in Europe were running on a system called mercantilism. The government's hands were in everything: trade, prices, even who was allowed to start a business. They saw wealth as a finite pie, and the goal was for your country to grab the biggest possible slice. But then, a Scottish philosopher named Adam Smith came along and proposed a completely revolutionary alternative. And this quote? This is the absolute core of his idea. Smith argued that when individuals are free to just pursue their own self-interest in a competitive market, it's like an invisible hand guides the whole economy to produce what society needs, and everyone benefits in the end. This hands-off approach got a famous French name, laissez-faire, which literally means let do. And this idea became the cornerstone of a whole new ideology called classical liberalism, which championed individual economic freedom above all else. Okay, Section 2, Capitalism Forged in Fire. Now, Adam Smith's ideas, they didn't just stay in books. Oh no. They became the philosophical fuel for one of the most disruptive and dramatic transformations in all of human history, the Industrial Revolution. So this new capitalist system just exploded. On the one hand, it unleashed unbelievable progress. We're talking massive wealth creation, incredible new technologies, the growth of cities, and the rise of a brand new middle class. But it came at a staggering human cost. I mean, brutal working conditions, rampant child labor, and just soul-crushing poverty for the new working class. So this really begs the question, right? Were the leaders of this new industrial age heroes or villains? Well, their supporters called them captains of industry, these bold innovators and job creators. But their critics had a different name: robber barons, ruthless monopolists who got rich by exploiting their workers. The truth, as it so often is probably somewhere in the middle. Next up, Section 3, The Specter of Communism. Now, as you can imagine, the harsh realities of early capitalism did not go unnoticed. In fact, they sparked a powerful backlash from thinkers who looked at this new system and didn't see progress. They saw oppression, and they had a totally different vision for society. And at the very forefront of this critique were Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. Their argument was that capitalism itself was fundamentally flawed. They believed it was a system based entirely on the exploitation of the working class, who they called the proletariat, by the owners of capital, the bourgeoisie. But Marx didn't just criticize capitalism. He predicted that it would inevitably collapse. He saw history as a series of stages. He believed capitalism's own flaws would lead to a revolution by the workers. This would create a temporary socialist state which would, in theory, eventually just wither away, leaving a perfect classless communist society. Okay, now this is a really critical distinction to understand. Not all critics of capitalism were the same. While Marx called for a violent revolution, you also had democratic socialists who believed you could achieve change peacefully through the ballot box. Their goal wasn't to get rid of all private property, but to create a mixed economy with a really strong social safety net. All right, on to Section 4, The Market Breaks. For a good while there, it seemed like Adam Smith's free market was winning the day. But then, in the early 20th century, the global capitalist system faced its biggest crisis ever, and for a terrifying moment, it looked like Karl Marx might have been right all along. A major flaw of pure laissez-faire capitalism was becoming painfully clear: its instability. Economies were on a wild roller coaster ride, prone to these massive swings known as the boom and bust cycle. You'd have periods of incredible growth or expansion, followed by devastating periods of decline, called recessions. And this cycle finally went completely off the rails with the Great Depression of the 1930s. This wasn't just a recession. It was a near total collapse of the global economy. In the US, a staggering 1 out of every 4 people was out of work. The invisible hand was nowhere to be found, and the old laissez-faire ideas offered no solutions. Into this crisis stepped a new thinker, the British economist John Maynard Keynes. He argued that the problem wasn't supply, it was a lack of demand. People just weren't spending money. His solution? Not less government, but more government. He said that during a downturn, governments must step in and spend money on infrastructure, on social programs, whatever it took to stimulate demand and create jobs. And Keynes's ideas gave rise to what we call modern liberalism and the mixed economy. This is a system that tries to blend free market capitalism with significant government intervention. You can see it in action in programs like Roosevelt's New Deal or the creation of the modern welfare state with things like public health care, education, and regulations designed to create a social safety net. But here's the thing about this story. The pendulum of ideas never stops swinging. After decades of Keynesian thinking being dominant, by the 1970s, the mixed economy was facing a very strange new crisis of its own, and that opened the door for free market ideas to make a huge comeback. The new problem was a bizarre monster called stagflation, and it was an economic nightmare. You had high unemployment, which usually happens in a bad economy, combined with high inflation or rising prices, which usually happens when the economy is booming. It was the worst of both worlds, and Keynesian economics simply had no answer for it. This crisis blew the door wide open for a counter-revolution, led by economists like Milton Friedman. He completely flipped Keynes's argument around. He said the problem wasn't a lack of demand, it was a lack of supply, and that government was the problem. His solution was to free up corporations by cutting their taxes and getting rid of regulations. The theory was that this new wealth at the top would spur investment and eventually trickle down to everyone else. This philosophy, known as supply-side economics or neoliberalism, was famously put into practice by leaders like Ronald Reagan in the US and Margaret Thatcher in the UK. Their playbook was all about privatization of state-owned industries, deregulation, lowering taxes, and reducing government spending through austerity. It was a massive, decisive swing of that pendulum back towards free market principles. And this, right here, is the key takeaway. This isn't just history. The fundamental debate between Smith, Marx, Keynes, and Friedman is still happening all around us, right now. Every single time you hear politicians arguing about tax cuts or government spending or new regulations, they are just refighting this 200-year-old battle of ideas. This constant tension is what defines so much of our modern world. From the invisible hand to the welfare state and back again, that pendulum just keeps on swinging, which leaves all of us with the big question for our time. Where is it headed next? Towards more government intervention or even greater market freedom? The next chapter is still being written.